The morning began with the kind of quiet only autumn can bring. Sun just beginning to warm the crisp air, painting the sky in strokes of pale gold and soft lavender. As I stepped out of the house with Max, my old Labrador retriever, I could feel the chill lingering on the porch railing, a reminder that summer was truly gone. Max moved slowly now, his once powerful legs stiff with age, his gait more shuffled than stride, but his spirit was unchanged. Tail swaying gently as he sniffed the air, his cloudy eyes bright with curiosity, despite the years weighing down his body. And watching him, I couldn't help but smile, because to me, he was more than just a pet. He was family. A loyal companion who had been with me through moves, job changes, heartbreaks, and celebrations, always steady, always present, always there with a wagging tail, no matter what storms life threw my way. I thought a quiet walk down the neighborhood trail would do us both good. A chance for him to stretch his legs and soak in the scents he loved so much, and for me, a chance to appreciate the peace that was so rare these days. Something guaranteed when Karen, the president of the HOA, was around, and as fate would have it, we had barely rounded the corner toward the lake path when her voice sliced through the morning, like a blade through silk sharp, shrill, and filled with the authority she clung to as tightly as the clipboard always tucked under her arm. "Is that old dog here? There's no place for him," she shouted, her words echoing across the quiet street, startling a couple of sparrows from a nearby fence and making Max pause mid-step, his ears twitching in confusion. I looked up to see her marching toward us, heels clicking against the pavement, face set in a scowl so deep it might have been etched into her bones, and I felt my chest tighten with the familiar blend of irritation and disbelief that always accompanied her appearances, because Karen had a way of turning even the simplest, most harmless acts into violations, as though she drew her sense of purpose not from fostering community, but from policing it, from finding faults where none existed, and inflating them into crises. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze fixed on Max with a disdain that cut me deeper than I expected. As if he were not a beloved member of my family, but some piece of trash left out on the lawn, and she jabbed a finger toward him like she was, pointing out evidence of a crime, launching into a tirade about neighborhood standards, liability concerns, and maintaining the aesthetic of the community. Each phrase more absurd than the last as she rattled them off with the cadence of someone who had rehearsed them in her head 1,000 times. I tried to interject, to explain that the trail was public access maintained by the town, not the HOA, and that residents had every right to walk their dogs there. But she cut me off with a wave of her clipboard, the pages fluttering as she snapped. "Rules are rules, and that dog doesn't belong here." Her voice climbing louder until it bounced off the houses around us, pulling curtains aside and coaxing neighbors out onto their porches, curious about the commotion. Max, oblivious to the politics of the moment, simply sat down on the path, panting softly, tail sweeping back and forth across the ground in an almost comical display of contentment, and seeing him there, so harmless, so gentle, made her anger look all the more ridiculous, yet she pressed on, her words growing sharper as she declared that dogs beyond their prime were unsafe, that his mere presence posed a risk to children, that allowing him here set a bad example. And though her accusations were nonsensical, the venom with which she hurled them stung, because beneath it all was the unspoken insult that Max, the dog who had been with me since college, who had comforted me after my father passed, who had greeted my wife with joy the day she first came to my door, was nothing more than an inconvenience to her, an obstacle in her endless campaign for control. I glanced around at the neighbors gathering, some whispering to each other, some shaking their heads, and I wondered if they saw what I saw, that this wasn't about a dog at all, but about Karen's need to dominate every inch of the community, to stamp out anything that didn't fit her rigid, sterile vision of perfection. And Max, with his gray muzzle and slow gait, presented everything she couldn't control: age, loyalty, history, the passage of time itself. "You'll need to take him off the property now," she barked finally, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. And in that moment, the quiet joy I'd felt at the start of the morning was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of confrontation, the knowledge that this walk, meant to be a gift to Max, had become another battle in Karen's endless war against anything that didn't suit her. And as I looked down at my old friend, who gazed up at me with nothing but trust, I knew this wasn't just about defending my right to walk my dog. It was about defending his dignity, his place, and the truth that he belonged here just as much, if not more, than Karen ever did. For a fleeting moment, I considered simply turning away, retreating from the confrontation the way I often had in the past to spare myself the headache of arguing with Karen. But then Max, as if sensing the tension in the air, shifted his weight, lowered himself onto the gravel path, and sat with a deliberate slowness that made the entire scene pause, his old bones creaking, but his tail sweeping gently back and forth, his cloudy eyes lifting toward the neighbors who had gathered, and in that simple act calm, patient, dignified, he somehow managed to command the kind of respect that Karen, with all her shouting and clipboards, could never achieve. One by one, people began to step closer, drawn by the absurdity of her rage against a dog who had been part of the neighborhood for longer than many of them had lived there. And I heard the first whispers rise from the small crowd. An older man on his porch muttered that he remembered Max chasing sticks by the lake when his grandchildren were still in elementary school. A woman near the mailbox remarked that she used to see Max trotting happily beside me on morning jogs back when he was young, and another neighbor, clutching a toddler on her hip, added softly that her son had learned to pet a dog for the first time, thanks to Max's gentle patience. Their voices overlapped, weaving together a chorus of quiet memories that painted a very different picture than Karen's shrill accusations. And as their words gathered strength, I could see Karen faltering, her glare flickering from face to face as though trying to assess how quickly she was losing her audience, her authority crumbling not because of anything I said, but because the truth was now spilling out in voices she could not silence. Max wagged his tail again, thumping it softly against the ground, and a small boy broke free from his mother's side to run forward and throw his arms around the old dog's neck, burying his face in the fur without fear, and the sight alone was enough to tilt the entire balance of the confrontation, because, in that innocent embrace, the neighborhood remembered what Karen had forgotten. That community is not about perfection or rules written in a binder, but about connection, loyalty, and history, all of which Max embodied simply by being there. Karen sputtered then, her face turning red, insisting that rules are rules and that liability falls on everyone if something happened. Her voice pitched higher and higher as though sheer volume could win back the ground she had lost. But this time the murmurs around her weren't supportive nods or deferential silence, they were groans, sighs, and even a few chuckles. And when one neighbor finally stepped forward, a man who had lived beside me for over a decade, he raised his voice just enough to cut through the noise and said firmly, "Karen, he's family. He belongs here. More than half of us do," the words landing with a finality that silenced her like a door slamming shut. The crowd nodded, some clapping softly, others murmuring agreement. And in that moment Karen stood alone, her clipboard suddenly looking less like a badge of authority and more like a shield. She was clutching against the truth that she had lost, that the community she claimed to represent no longer stood behind her, but behind an old dog. His quiet presence had done more to unify us in 10 minutes than her leadership had in years. I felt a swell of pride then, not just for Max, but for the neighbors who finally saw through the charade, who recognized that the rules Karen wielded like weapons had nothing to do with real community spirit. And as I placed a hand gently on Max's head, I looked at her and said evenly, "He belongs here." My voice calm, but carrying enough weight to seal the moment, and there was nothing more to add. Nothing more she could say that wouldn't sound hollow in the face of the truth laid bare before her. She opened her mouth once, twice, as if to protest, but no words came, only a sharp huff as she spun on her heel, her shoes crunching furiously against the gravel as she stormed back up the road. Shoulders hunched, her departure as loud in its silence as her arrival had been in its noise. The neighbors lingered, some coming closer to scratch Max behind the ears, others sharing stories and laughter that slowly washed away the tension, until the air felt lighter, freer, as though something heavy had finally been lifted from us all. And when the crowd eventually dispersed, leaving just me and Max standing on the path again. The old dog rose to his feet with surprising steadiness, his tail wagging as if to thank everyone who had stood up for him, and together we continued our walk down toward the lake, not fast, not with the energy of years past, but with the kind of deliberate pride that comes from knowing you are exactly where you're meant to be. And as the sunlight danced across the water and the breeze rustled the last of the golden leaves, I realized that Karen could shout. She could enforce. She could wave her clipboard until the ink wore off the pages. But she could never erase the truth that Max wasn't just a dog in this neighborhood. He was part of its story, its memory, its soul-land. No rule, no HOA meeting, and no amount of shouting would ever change that.